Adam Warlock is one of the most complex and storied heroes in the history of Marvel Comics. Making his big screen debut in Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, Warlock is a character that probably should have been included in films years ago, seeing how closely tied he is to the Soul Stone, Thanos, and the Guardians of the Galaxy in general. Warlock is an interesting character in the sense that he's essentially a comic book allegory for Jesus, and heavily inspired by the musical Jesus Christ Superstar. While created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, the majority of the foundation for Adam Warlock was actually written by Roy Thomas and Jim Starlin over the span of multiple decades. Today, we want to take a brief look at Adam Warlock's semi-complicated comic history, as well as some of his most famous stories in comics. Adam Warlock technically has a few different comic book first appearances, due mostly to the fact that he has 4 appearances that are all essentially glorified cameos. It's rocky terrain primarily dependent upon comic collectors, but from a purely chronological perspective, the being that would go on to become known as Warlock made their first comic book debut in Fantastic Four issue number 67, written by Stan Lee and drawn by Jack Kirby, although he was mentioned slightly in issue 66. The being known as Adam Warlock is first simply known as him, and is first mentioned in issue number 66 when the longtime girlfriend of the Thing, Alicia Masters, is kidnapped by a group called the Enclave. The Enclave was a group of hyper-intelligent scientists attempting to create a perfect being using advanced science for the all-too-common goal of world domination. The Enclave succeeded in creating the perfect being, but that being broke free and isolated itself inside of their complex called the Beehive. Simply known as him, he kept the Enclave at bay, using powers to create blinding light that would make them unable to navigate through to him. The Enclave kidnaps Alicia Masters, who's blind, in order to attempt to approach and talk to him. However, when she successfully reaches him, she finds that he's sealed himself inside of a cocoon. Alicia is eventually rescued by the Human Torch and Thing as him's power levels within the cocoon continue to rise. The Enclave attempts to use a failsafe to transport him to outer space where he would no longer be a threat, but the failsafe fails and him emerges from his cocoon as a golden-skinned perfect man, basically me in comic book form. The last thing you see is the Enclave's base, the Beehive, exploding, presumably killing everyone. Thor 165 and 166, also by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, further expands upon this early time in Him's existence where he comes into contact with Thor. Him was a very primal being, having no moral compass or life experience, and was bred specifically for conquest. Therefore, he determines that Sif could be a potential mate, so he, kidnaps her. Thor and Balder track him down to save Sif, although at first it appears him is vastly more powerful than Thor. Thor, fully enraged, enters into what Odin refers to as a warrior's madness while battling the Golden God and nearly kills him. Having just relieved his first true ass beating, Him decides to relinquish Sif. He encases himself back into the safety of a cocoon and retreats into space to heal. From there, Him rests and recovers from his battle as his cocoon serves as a regenerative chamber. And that pretty much ends Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's take on the character, and the character is shelved for about 3 years. From here, writer Roy Thomas and artist/author Jim Starlin pick him back up and transform the character into his modern interpretation. Warlock had already demonstrated a wide variety of abilities at this point: super strength, super speed, enhanced invulnerability, and cosmic energy manipulation, but now we start to dive into his biggest strength, the Soul Stone. Marvel Premiere number 1 starts building the foundation for the character who will now come to be known as Adam Warlock. This series' story is heavily rooted in Christian mythology, and I'll cover that in brief detail later. The High Evolutionary is traveling through space in his ship that looks like a big asteroid and comes across Him's cocoon. While scanning the cocoon, Him is able to telepathically communicate with the High Evolutionary, informing him of his origins and early battles with Thor. The High Evolutionary explains his whole deal as well. He's in the process of completing something called Project Alpha, the creation of a new perfect Earth. He calls this world Counter-Earth, from a ball of molten rock containing the genetic blueprint of our planet. The Earth is to be free of all of the problems humanity faces today. High Evolutionary uses his tremendous power to force that ball of rock to grow to planetary levels, then he creates life and forces its evolution by billions of years. The process of acting as essentially God forces the High Evolutionary to become extremely exhausted, and while he's recovering, his ship is attacked by one of his former creations, Man-Beast. Man-Beast sabotages the High Evolutionary's new counter-Earth by infecting the planet's new beings with hatred. In a panic, Him emerges from his cocoon, forcing Man-Beast to flee. Him decides to go to counter-Earth to stop Man-Beast. High Evolutionary, though, gives him an emerald gem to wear upon his brow, the Soul Gem, and renames him Warlock. Warlock wakes up on Counter-Earth with no memory of how he got there, and he befriends 4 teenagers who bring him to safety to recuperate. And it's okay, it was the 70s, fully grown men hanging out with teens wasn't weird at all back then. The teens give him the first name Adam, believing he needs 2 names like everybody else on the planet. Adam Warlock then battles animal humanoid servants of Man-Beast on the planet before learning that the gem on his forehead has the capability of returning them to human form, with other unknown powers that he now commands. The remainder of the first Warlock series saw numerous adventures culminating in the final climactic battle against the forces of Man-Beast. After the defeat of Man-Beast, Warlock chooses to leave Counter-Earth in order to protect other worlds and species that might need his help. Now, as I alluded to earlier, this was essentially the Space Jesus arc. God, the High Evolutionary, creates Adam, Warlock, who acts as Space Jesus, being reborn over and over again. Adam goes down to this perfect Earth in order to save it from sin and is literally crucified, dies, and is reborn. The undertones are there, but Roy Thomas did a really great job of not having it be so heavy-handed. Strange Tales 178 through 181 brings Warlock back yet again, this time telling my personal favorite part of his history, the Magus Saga. Warlock happens upon a woman being attacked and attempts to save her life while finding out that she's a refugee of the Universal Church of Truth. He fails and she dies, but Warlock uses the power of the Soul Gem to force her soul to reveal the history of the church. He finds that the Universal Church of Truth was run by Magus, a being who had enslaved and destroyed billions across the cosmos. We learn that Magus is, in all actuality, Warlock himself, from an alternate timeline where he grows powerful beyond belief, but evil. Throughout Strange Tales 180 through 181, we get introduced to a number of other really awesome new characters like Pip the Troll, Gamora, the most dangerous woman in the galaxy, and we saw Warlock align with the Mad Titan Thanos. Warlock was finally able to overcome Magus by destroying the timeline that he came from. Everybody loves a good story where the good guys fights a villain that's basically themselves, and this was literally Adam vs. Adam for all of the Marvels. But more importantly, this set the stage for other concepts that become extremely important to Adam's comic book history, like the capabilities of the Soul Stone, the Soul World, and his longtime feud with Thanos. The introduction of Thanos in Adam's Rogues Gallery also sets the stage for Jim Starlin to continue expanding upon the Infinity Gems, which we now know are quite powerful weapons. They also played with the idea that Adam is the master of the Soul Gem, which was the avatar of life, where Thanos was the avatar of death, interlinking them forever. Thanos proved to be quite an adversary over the coming years, and during this time, Starlin built Thanos' obsession and love interest with the cosmic manifestation of death. One of these plans saw Thanos attempt to destroy Earth's sun, killing billions to appease death. The conflict saw Warlock, Gamora, Pip, and a boatload of Avengers engage in a number of battles with Thanos, and while Warlock was able to eventually beat him, the final battle culminates with Warlock badly beaten, being sucked into the Soul Gem to live peacefully within it for a very long time. And there, Adam Warlock stayed for 11 years. Now, in an effort to make sure that this video isn't 5,000 years long, I'm going to focus from here on out on explaining the most important elements of Warlock's more modern incarnation. So, it took nearly 11 more years before Adam Warlock showed up in Marvel Comics history again. After the events of the Thanos quest, where Thanos gathers the Infinity Stones, Warlock comes back onto the scene in Infinity Gauntlet, the legendary crossover event. There, Warlock acts as more of a cosmic advisor and overseer as the various heroic and cosmic forces of the galaxy attempt to stop Thanos from committing genocide on a cosmic scale, again to try and court his baddie, his love interest, Death. The conflict ends and Thanos is defeated. Adam comes into possession of the Infinity Gauntlet, and following Thanos' defeat, we also see Thanos, the supreme scourge of the galaxy, retire from villainy, now reformed to be a farmer. Warlock maintained a goal of becoming a cosmic overseer for the galaxy using the gauntlet, but was soon afterwards convinced by the living tribunal that he was unworthy to become this all-powerful supreme being, and he divided the gems amongst others. He gave himself the Soul Stone, Gamora the Time Stone, Pip the Space Stone, Drax the Power Stone, Moondragon the Mind Stone, and secretly and shockingly enough, Thanos the Reality Stone, who he believed was now reformed. That group goes on to its own series known as the Infinity Watch. Various forms of the Infinity Watch continue to exist for years following this, and there are some cool stories in here that see Warlock fighting his own literal light and dark side. His dark side being a revived form of Magus, and his light side being a new character named Goddess, who is essentially his morally abstract good side and conscience. While focusing on Warlock's comic origins is great, you might be thinking to yourself, well, Nick, what's the deal with his ties to the Guardians of the Galaxy? Why the hell is he even in this movie? And that's a great question, other me with a worse voice than my normal annoying one. During the time period when Civil War was keeping the majority of Marvel's Earth-based heroes firmly fighting each other, Marvel was revamping its cosmic universal storytelling. The main event here was called Annihilation, which saw Annihilus, a being from the Negative Zone, arrive and systematically take over the galaxy with a large armada known as the Annihilation Wave. The follow-up to this event was Annihilation Conquest, that saw the Phalanx, a techno-organic race, overtaken by Ultron, who becomes a nearly all-powerful cosmic entity using the Phalanx. Following the battle with Phalanx Ultron, Star-Lord determines that a new team was needed to protect the galaxy from similar possible events: cosmic-scale destruction. Star-Lord assembled a team that consisted of various criminals that he had worked with on missions while working for the Kree. Star-Lord chose Rocket Raccoon, a weapons expert and tactical genius, Mantis, a psychic, the new Quasar, Falavel, the recently reborn Warlock, who now appears a bit younger, and of course a pair of deadly assassins, Gamora and Drax the Destroyer. And that, my friends, seems like as good of a place to end a comic origins video as any. Obviously, Adam Warlock is a cosmic powerhouse, but importantly, he's a complex character that opens the door to a wide array of potential comic stories. I'd love to see some of these later events like Annihilation adapted into the MCU now that our core Guardians team is wrapped up, but only time will tell what the future of the MCU holds for Adam Warlock, but he is certainly an integral part of Marvel Comics' cosmic storytelling. I really like Adam Warlock, and I really like what he brings to the table in terms of storytelling potential, and it would be crazy to not have him lead a new version of the Guardians of the Galaxy, as that franchise is wide open now for new stories to tell. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you learned a lot, and if you did, remember to like and subscribe and do all that other junk that YouTubers ask you to do. This has been Nick with Key Issues. Thank you again for watching, and remember the motto, Adam Warlock over everything.